middle? Or
I want to face you, kind of.
We got this.
Yeah, it's like in the
Okay.
kitchen.
Like in the kitchen. Yeah. Kitchen talks.
Oh.
Okay.
Good evening to everyone who's tuned in to CCTV Radio tonight. My name is Lisa Kuro, and I'll be your host for the next hour. We'll be discussing topics such as women of colour in the creative industry, cultural appropriation, as well as tokenism. And today we have a very special guest with us, Ray Tilley. But I'll introduce her later, shortly. We'll also be playing a few tunes throughout the show, which I hope you guys will enjoy. First, I wanted to give a bit of a background on what I do. As many of you probably don't know, I own an online sustainable fashion brand called The Black Market. I've had it for about 5 years now, and you know, growing up, my parents had a fashion business as well. My mom migrated from Vietnam, my dad migrated from Thailand, and I sort of always watched them hustle and trying to make money. And obviously growing up, we struggled quite a lot financially as well. So I do have quite vivid memories of going to Salvation Army, which is like this charity shop in Australia. I don't know if you guys have heard of it.
As well.
Yeah. And my mum would kind of go off into the furniture section, but I would sort of wander off by myself to the clothing section. And I think that's really where my love for vintage clothing and secondhand clothing originated from. And obviously, the fashion industry is so polluting and is really damaging our planet. It's the second most polluting industry in the world, actually. So that, coupled with my love for vintage fashion, it was just very natural for me to start my own business in that sphere. But enough about me. I brought my special guest, Ray Tilley, as you can see. She's also a woman of colour.
I am.
And is the founder of Yoja Mag.
Yeah, so just to quickly introduce myself, as mentioned, my name is Ray. I am a Korean American. I was adopted from South Korea at 4 months old and was raised in Virginia for most of my life. I've been in Germany for the last 10 years. I split my time between Germany and London. And amongst many of the things I do, one of the main things is that I founded Yoja Mag about 3 years ago. And I decided to start Yoja Magazine because as a child I really felt a lack of representation for my own community and other minority communities as well. And I really wanted to give a platform and a voice to people who are normally marginalised and don't necessarily have a voice in mainstream media. So that's kind of where Yoja Mag came about.
Yeah, it's a really important magazine to have, and I wish that existed when I was actually younger as well. But before we dive into our first topic, I want to play a song called Unemployed by Tierra Whack. I'm not sure if many of you guys have heard of it before, but she's a singer, rapper, and songwriter from Philadelphia.
I must be a criminal. Keep it talking minimal. Cause most of it's subliminal. And it'll put you in a critical. Used to be invisible. They would refer to me as mythical. Sipping on mystic, yeah, I sip it slow. Not on my level, not on your tippy toes. Walking the back and I yell, give me those. Hot as a stove, yeah, I'm wearing Fendi clothes. I want my spot, yeah, look at Wendy knows. My niggas eating, they getting minerals. If you throw shots, you know my mineral. Up on your block, now you looking pitiful. Tinted the windows, I need a minute, yo. All of your misses all mad and miserable. You picked the wrong time to pick a fight. Your bitch a dyke, she thinks she Ike. You sipping on a drink of spike. Enough for you to say goodnight for the rest of your life. I know your sons won't miss you. I did a favor for them niggas. You took a loss to a winner. Rick Ross, you banana. You ain't fly, I make your wings stop. I'm real as fuck and your ring's not. Fresh as hell like a king socks. Your real car is a slingshot. Don't need a gun, I use a slingshot. If I was a beverage, you would have to drink hot. Got a job I gotta do. I get down and dirty too. What it is, what it do. Same shit, nothing new. Got a job, gotta do. I get down and dirty too. What it is, what it do. Same shit, nothing new. Got a job I gotta do. I get down and dirty too. What it is, what it do. Same shit, nothing new. Got a job I gotta do. I get down and dirty too. What it is, what it do. Same shit, nothing new. Having flashbacks, where your past that? Where the cash at? Ayo, past that. I will stab back just for bags racks. Front on me and I'll punch your ass flat. Are you okay? Please don't ask that. I I don't act black, got a fat cat. You a rat, rat-a-tat-tat-tat-a-tat-tat. Tattoos, but you can't see them. Ice cold, yeah, I'm going skiing. I get around at the Coliseum. Used to roam around with no pot to pee, and I was pissed off. Get away with murder like Christoph. You get crisscrossed in the big loft. I'm a big boss. So much sauce, I drip broth. The wait is over. I'm taking over. You're overweight. You ate a soda. I'm super sober. You doing coke. Coca-Cola, ahead of you, like a closure. When Troy died, I had to find some closure. Don't push me, bitch, I am not a stroller. Pop up on a nigga like bread and toast. A double D cup, you should use a coaster. I'm on the post and need a Della coaster, so I shop it over. Blue faces, and I call them growers, but a PK Rover, I'm that older. Wanna be like me when I get older. Talk to God, then he came over. Talk to God, then he came over. Got a job, I gotta do. I get down and dirty too. What it is, what it do. Same shit, nothing new. Got a job, gotta do. I get down and dirty too. What it is, what it do. Same shit, nothing new. Got a job, I gotta do. I get down and dirty too. What it is, what it do. Same shit, nothing new. Got a job, I gotta do. I get down and dirty too. What it is, what it do. Same shit, nothing new.
This is it. Okay, so let's get right into it then.
Okay.
The first topic that I want to kind of delve into is cultural appropriation. And I think the best way to sort of approach this is to define it for a lot of listeners who actually might not have heard of this term before or don't really know how to understand it. So the definition that I have in front of me is cultural appropriation is the adoption of certain elements from another culture without the consent of people who belong to that culture. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think that when we're talking about cultural appropriation, it's quite important to emphasize the fact that, for the most part, cultural appropriation happens when somebody from the dominant group is taking something from a culture from a minority group. So a really great example that I'm sure everybody would have already seen in the media is when the Kardashians came out with braids. They renamed them boxer braids, but that's been something that has existed within black culture as cornrows for a very long time. And so that's a perfect illustration of something that was taken from a minority group, repurposed by the majority and repackaged and given another name. So oftentimes within these conversations about cultural appropriation, it's that the dominant group isn't giving ownership or legitimacy to the group in which it actually came from. So I think that's a really important note to add as well.
Yeah, that's a really good addition, actually. I come across cultural appropriation quite a lot in my life. One that really stands out to me is a friend of mine recently received some merch from a Swedish brand, actually. And I was with her when she unpackaged it, and she opened up this box, and there was the first thing I saw was like a T-shirt, and it had Japanese kanji writing on it. And then as she took the T-shirt out, there was like a pair of chopsticks. And I was like, okay, like a little bit gimmicky, but I guess cute. But then as I did a bit more research, I realized that the brand actually wasn't even owned by someone who's Japanese. It was actually owned by two white Swedish men. And for me, that is cultural appropriation, because these two white men are essentially capitalizing from the minority that is the Japanese culture. And, while it may be considered cool when a white person wears this T-shirt, it's certainly not the case if a Japanese or an Asian person like you and I wear it. We're categorized as being too ethnic, which is very problematic. But how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's problematic when... I think the bottom line is that obviously we would all love to live in a world where we can all take from other cultures, incorporate into what we're doing, create something new from it, appreciate it, and we'll get into the differences between appropriation and appreciation, as well as assimilation in a little bit. But I think the main thing to understand right now is that we don't live in a society that treats people equally, and we live in a society where systemic racism is still a problem, and there are communities that basically, if they have things in their own communities, they're not seen as legitimate or oftentimes not professional or this, that, and the other thing when they themselves are representing where they're coming from, or they're marginalized or otherized within school systems. So I think we've spoken privately before about how, if you're an Asian kid and you show up at school for lunch and you're eating your lunch with chopsticks, then you're that, the weird Asian kid. Or if you pull out kimchi at lunch, everyone's like, oh, that smells like, what is that? But now, we have this case of this particular brand capitalizing off of somebody's culture, somebody's language, without any real connection to that said culture. And I don't think it's right to display things from other cultures without having a really good reason for it. I don't know the brand. I don't know if somebody that works for the brand, so you said it's two Swedish men, but I don't know if somebody in-house is Japanese. We'd really have to research that to really make a final educated opinion on this particular brand. But by and large, in general, I would say that if you're from the white majority and you're borrowing tropes from other cultures specifically for its aesthetic value, then you really need to reevaluate why you're doing it. Another huge point I think that relates to that, and I've written down a handy dandy statistic somewhere, but it was over 80, I think it was about 84% of capital, like startups, they're getting their, like people that are getting their money are white. And so this is a really big point to illustrate that it's hard enough for minorities out there to succeed as entrepreneurs, as creatives in their own businesses, and then for the aspects that make them who they are to be then taken by people outside of that culture to exploit and to make money off of is very problematic in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, and I think I've seen a huge emergence as well, especially in the fashion industry, of like Orientalism or just, stealing of Asian culture to commodify it and repackage and repurpose it, like you said, and essentially capitalize from it as well.
I think also, like, bearing in mind, taking this exact example, I think you mentioned that the word arigato is in the name of the brand.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is the same as if I started a brand called, like, Danke, and then, like, put a fork in it, like, in a package with a T-shirt. Like, that has no relevance. And I think there's a real lack of understanding of culture if you take something that is the most, easily recognizable symbol of that culture in Western society. So obviously chopsticks, people automatically think Asian. And I think that's problematic too, because, like, what is the relevancy to the brand? Like, what is the relevancy in terms of culture? If they really were trying to highlight an important point about chopsticks, fine. Like, but I kind of doubt in this situation that was the case. It seems a bit like some token Asian aspect that was just chucked into this little press kit to just make things look a bit more Asian.
Exactly. And leeching off from that as well, in the media recently, more or less, I think in the last year, you probably heard about Katy Perry's situation where she wore a kimono and had like a full face of makeup and was dressed as a geisha at the American Music Awards. Straight after that, a lot of Asian Americans or Asian Australians, including myself, criticized her for stereotyping Japanese culture. But what I found really interesting was when I spoke to my Japanese friends, a lot of them actually saw it as appreciation for their culture. Sort of this kind of bringing their culture to the limelight, whereas before in the past, I guess they were sort of always in the minority, but at the same time were sort of in the background in Western society. I guess now they feel like for the first time in a long time, their culture is being seen in mainstream media, whether it's like in music, whether it's at in film, or whether it's at a music show performed live. Do you have an opinion on that? Do you see? I think it's really important to distinguish between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation.
Yeah, I think also a really big point to add within this particular conversation, because it's very similar to a situation that happened in the States recently where a Caucasian girl wore a Chinese traditional dress to her prom, and it was the same obvious media shitstorm. A lot of people within minority communities found this extremely offensive, and they felt that there was a lot of appropriation going on. I think the girl herself said she found the dress at a charity shop and she just thought it was very beautiful and that's why she wore it. There were apparently photos of her kind of posing in a very stereotypically Asian way, so this kind of threw off her argument of just finding it aesthetically pretty, and wearing things just for their aesthetic value without knowing where they're coming from is also still appropriation anyway, and that's another topic to the side. But obviously within that context too, a lot of Asian Americans were really upset about this, but within China people were like, oh, we're quite happy that our clothes are being celebrated. So very similar to the situation with Katy Perry. And I think it's quite important to really put emphasis on two factors. One being that the Asian American experience or the Asian Australian experience, or being a minority in a predominantly white society, that experience is drastically different than being Chinese in China or being Japanese in Japan. and there's also language barrier that's happening there too.
Yeah.
So whereas somebody from Japan might see a video with their garments being worn, they might not necessarily realize the nuances in the fact that there are still certain tropes that are being, I guess, repeated, and kind of obviously if you're portraying this image of women being very submissive from Asian culture, and you have no prior, love or appreciation for that culture in a deeper sense, but you're doing it for a stage presence, for the aesthetics, and then you're still feeding into this negative stereotype about a race that isn't even your own.
Yeah.
I think that's a bit lost, maybe possibly through translation. I obviously don't know for sure, but I can imagine it might be. And so whereas someone from Japan might just think, oh, our traditional dresses are now being seen and that's a great thing, they might maybe not have realised that it is perpetuating quite negative stereotype.
Yeah, and like on top of that as well, Katy Perry and a lot of other musicians like Gwen Stefani, I mean, the list is endless. A lot of these musicians obviously get dressed up, they go on stage, they perform, they release a song, a music video clip, but then at the end of the day, they are able to like take these pieces off
and I think,
capitalize from it, and they might make millions off this one particular song, but then at the end of the day, the Asian Americans, the Australian Americans, etc., are the ones that have to like deal with the consequences of
definitely of those perpetuating the stereotype.
The stereotype, exactly.
Definitely. I think the other point I wanted to quickly add as well, in terms of the difference between Asian Americans and their opinions on it, or as we mentioned, just Asians within Western contexts in general, versus those that grow up within Asia, is playing right off of what you just said. And the fact is that the power structures that relate to being an Asian within a Western society as a minority group is drastically different than being Chinese in China. And so the relationship that we have to our culture, or the way that people perceive us when we try to apply for a job or when we get hit on at a bar, all relates back to issues like this. And what Katy Perry does or did is compounding those things and making, as you said, it harder for us when we try to be taken seriously for us as individuals rather than a walking stereotype of our race that isn't even necessarily accurate to an accurate depiction of who you or me or any other person from that group are.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you for that. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
I think that one more thing I would add is that you've spoken a little bit about the fact that, when somebody from a specific ethnic minority eats something from their own culture, that they almost become even more of that culture. They're seen even more as a representation of that, but more of a stereotype, in fact. And I think that that's one of the things that is difficult. And like you said, you can still take it off if you're white. So I think if you're white, you're kind of seen a little bit as the status quo, and you're also still seen as your individual self. Whereas, when you walk down the street and you get konnichiwa or ni hao dat, all they're seeing is you representing this specific idea that they have in their heads of an Asian woman. Whereas that girl who wore the Chinese dress, when she takes it off after prom, she's still Katie or whatever her name is. I don't know if her name is Katie, but maybe her name is Katie, I don't know. But I think, that's a huge point as well, I think, to illustrate.
Exactly, and it's something that I think a lot of us are aware of from a very young age. Like, we mentioned the whole lunch situation. I mean, I vividly remember also, and I'm sure that a lot of people can relate, like turning up to lunch with a box of rice and fish or anything like that, and then having like those certain looks given to you by the children because you're like different. And then that kind of like grows throughout high school and university. And I mean, I hate to admit this, but towards the end of the uni, it was like so ingrained into me that I was forced to actually change a part of my surname so that it sounded more westernized. And that's like a horrible thing to have to process and do at such a young age.
This is a huge topic, I think, about names and assimilation, because a lot of the people that I grew up around with that are Korean, like, they all have English names. Oftentimes they're like English Bible names.
Right.
And it's simply because they don't want the teachers to have the stress of trying to pronounce their name. There's a really funny bit by, what is the guy's name again? Peel, what's the guy's name? The other guy. There's a show, Keaton and Peele or something. Oh my God, the guy who did the movie, the Get Out. Like
Jordan Peele.
Yeah,
okay.
Peele, but the other guy. He had this show on Comedy Central.
Okay.
And they did a bit where like it was like a black teacher coming into a white school and like he can't pronounce anyone's names because it's kind of an art.
I think I've seen this actually.
It's really funny.
Yeah,
it's really, really
but
good.
exactly though.
But it's one of those things where like you shouldn't have to apologize for your own culture. You should not have to become less of who you are and take up less space simply because people don't want to take the time of day to pronounce your name. And it is that deep because your name is your identity, and your identity is intrinsically linked to who you are.
Exactly. For me, the main reason was applying for jobs. I intrinsically knew that if my full Thai surname was like written on a CV and employers were to browse through CVs, I would probably be initially eliminated in the first round purely because of my name, without even getting a chance to like get to the stage of having an interview. For me, that was the kind of process that my mind was going through at like the age of 17.
And this is something completely legitimate and understandable. And I think that this is exactly the topic about assimilation, is that when people from the minority communities feel like they have to do something in order to be seen slightly as equal to the other groups, that I don't put blame on anyone that does that. All you're trying to do is survive and get by. And that's drastically different than borrowing something from a culture simply because aesthetically it fits in with whatever's happening on Instagram this month, It's interesting because in Germany, you're actually meant to have your photo when you apply for things. And I find that quite interesting because in America, that's a huge no-no because, people are worried about racial profiling.
Of course, yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, in Germany, you still attach a photo. So it's quite, that's something else to unpack because I don't know the historical significance of why that's done, because I didn't grow up in Germany. But I always found it quite interesting as an American.
I mean, historically, Germany was a predominantly white city.
Predominantly white,
so I guess that wouldn't have been a huge issue. Now it's changed dramatically, especially in Berlin.
Although guest workers came after the war, so I mean, but of course, it's a different history than the States.
Yeah, well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
We'll give listeners a chance to take in what we've just said.
Great.
And play a song by Sudan Archives called Not For Sale.
Amazing.
She's a violinist and vocalist based in Los Angeles.
You only call me when you need something. I need to be free. Time to spread my wings. I don't like leeches. All that nonsense, gon' get back with ya. Don't got time for snitches. You're pulling me down, but you was my sister. My strings propagate through space and time, here and there at the same time. In dimensions and basic rhyme, you ain't gotta be mad. Look deeper, go higher when you climb. But stay out of my path, but stay out of my flight path. Never feeling lonely, only gliding, flying. Always being constantly reminded. Time is running up, don't waste your luck, sucker. This is my life, don't mix that up. This is my light, don't block the sun. This is my seat, can't you tell? This is my time, don't waste it up. This is my land, not for sale. Desert air blowing through my hair. As we blow through the square, we don't even care. Dirt roads and bare feet, tied to memories so sweet. Mesmerized men at my feet. Let's go to the top, just you and me. As the sun hides and fog takes over, I call it African November. Don't wait for me, summer. Oh, don't wait for me. Don't wait for me, summer. No, don't wait for me. My strings propagate through space and time, here and there at the same time. In dimensions and basic rhyme, you ain't gotta be mad. Look deeper, go higher when you climb. But stay out of my path, but stay out of my flight path. Never feeling lonely, only gliding, flying. Always being constantly reminded. Time is running up, don't waste your luck, sucker. This is my life, don't mix that up. This is my light, don't block the sun. This is my seat, can't you tell? This is my time, don't waste it up. This is my land, not for sale.
Hi, I hope you guys are still tuned in and find this conversation interesting. Okay, so the next, we're still gonna discuss a little bit more about cultural appropriation because I think it's such a big topic.
It is a big topic.
And I wanna delve into the whole Dolce & Gabbana campaign. I don't know if you remember that.
Okay. Well,
Happened
tell us a little bit about that campaign.
Well, so it was a huge controversy that arose when this Italian brand got an Asian model, a Chinese model actually specifically, to sit in front of a table and use chopsticks to eat pizza and a cannoli. And while this was happening, mind you, she's obviously in the background, there's like Chinese Oriental symbolic kind of background. Anyway, so she's eating this cannoli, and in the background, the narrator speaks, and he kind of jokingly says, "Oh, like, is the cannoli too big for you?" And it's kind of said in a way that everyone who's watching it is supposed to be laughing at the expense of the model. And what was really upsetting for me is it really does kind of go into the whole perpetuating of the Asian stereotype that a lot of us are faced with on a daily basis, you know, that of being an Asian woman being submissive and docile, obviously. And on top of that, like, I also remember reading this study done by OkCupid where they kind of sort of did a study to see which gender and which race was messaged the most and the least. And to my surprise, actually, Asian women were messaged the most. Asian women were. And it made me think, like, okay, is that because Asian women play into that stereotype of
Do you mean
being
they
submissive?
themselves are playing
No, not them
into it?
themselves,
Okay,
sorry.
okay.
People's perceptions of it, sorry. People perceive Asian women as being submissive and docile. And it plays into this whole, like, toxic masculinity of the man being more dominant and the woman being more accommodating. And that's why the Dolce & Gabbana campaign really hit a certain spot for me because of that.
Oh, definitely. I can completely understand that. Obviously, also as an Asian female, I think that obviously many women of colour relate to each other on a very specific level, being women of colour, but specifically being an Asian female, I think we can both relate to the specific types of stereotypes that we particularly face, and how I think within this context specifically, heterosexual men from heterosexual white men, or not even white necessarily, but from other groups come at us and approach us based on these kind of perpetuated stereotypes. Obviously every different minority group, and that being said, gender as well, because obviously we both know the way that Asian men navigate the world is markedly different than how Asian women do. The way that black men do versus black women is markedly different. Comparing all those together, they all have very different experiences, and I think we all have different hardships for sure. It's not a competition of who has it worse. I think sometimes Asians get overlooked a bit in terms of the fact that the kind of violence that we face, I would still say the kind of violence we face is still not nearly as problematic as in the States that, you know, if you're a black male you face, because you actually have to worry about being killed for doing things as simple as taking a phone out of your pocket or walking down the street or being in your own backyard for that matter. But I would still say that in a culture that perpetuates a very toxic masculine ideal of this type of stereotype of a man having to be this authoritative, stereotypically masculine character, that's why I think they tend to find, or men that, you know, fit into that or believe in that kind of concept or social structure or gender structure, you know, they will feed into this kind of stereotype about Asian women. And while it might not be physically violent, although you never know, if you get into a situation with somebody off of Tinder and they have that that idea about you as an Asian woman, and you go home with somebody and you face a situation where you're in a room unsafe with somebody who's trying to do something to you sexually. Like, it can be quite violent. I'm sure that there have been cases of that. But I think even walking down the street, when you get faced with, you know, people saying konnichiwa or saying stupid shit, that affects you, and that is violent. It doesn't have to be a slap to the face to be violent. My first boyfriend in Germany, and he was German, and we were walking down the street. Some guy yelled off his bike in German, roughly translated into, "Oh, she was bought from a catalogue." And that's the kind of mentality that people, specifically I think more in Germany than necessarily in the States, because there's obviously I think a higher percentage of men that engage in sex tourism within places like Thailand, and that's not as prevalent in the States. And we have a longer history of Asians being within within America in a different context, but still we're objectified there too. But that idea that, you know, we're simply something to be bought is highly problematic, and we're not there just to cook your dinner and to just listen to you and be submissive. And I think that every culture has a lot of positive aspects as well as negative aspects, and there are some beautiful things about Asian culture in terms of maybe being quite respectful in ways that are seen as submissive in the West, but that doesn't mean that it gives the right to men to treat, or also women for that matter, within lesbian communities, like to treat an Asian woman in that submissive role, or to make them, or to put them in that role.
Exactly. No, I agree completely, and that's why Dolce & Gabbana is cancelled.
Yeah, I think it's also problematic in that. Sorry.
I was just going to say, like, I think obviously there are so many different solutions around this, but it is definitely a systematic problem. If Dolce & Gabbana, an Italian brand, had an Asian woman or like a person of color on their team, I highly doubt that this campaign would have actually aired.
Oh, definitely.
Or been produced, you know.
Yeah, or at least they might have thought twice about it.
Exactly.
Through the work with my magazine, obviously, we tried to bring up these topics a lot and to really discuss these things, to make people think twice about things that might seem quite harmless, that really aren't. And I think that things that seem harmless but aren't are more insidious than things that are blatantly racist, because it's a lot easier to push a microaggression under the rug than it would be when you're talking about somebody actually being physically assaulted. But that's also why I'm trying to engage with brands through the work that I do, to also do diversity consultancy. I think it's super important for brands to be aware of these topics, to want to give visibility to people from marginalized communities, but to do it in the right way and in a sensitive way, to not tokenize, and to really understand why diversity is important. And this is a case where, yes, an Asian woman was cast, but only to perpetuate a stereotype. And when you do something at the expense of a human being's feelings, or their stand within society, simply to make sales, I honestly find that deplorable.
Right, exactly. No, I completely agree. I mentioned, I guess, I think it is a systematic problem that arises from the top of the chain and kind of like filters through. You know, are there any other solutions? I mean, I have a few. I think there are some really important questions that we have
some notes. So
we have some notes.
On the next page.
We as consumers or buyers should consider before making a purchase, before wearing something.
Definitely.
So, for example, you know, festival season is like amongst us right now, and when you flick through Instagram, it's quite obvious that a lot of people are rocking or wearing, you know, headpieces, like Native American headpieces.
I would have hoped that people had left that in Coachella like 5 years ago, but I guess some people are still pulling it out.
Unfortunately not. And if only like these people, you know, took a step back and kind of asked themselves questions like, look, which culture am I borrowing this from? You know, maybe do a little bit of research. Are you borrowing this to get a particular reaction? You know, are you wearing this because you saw another Instagram girl wear it and you think it's cool? Are you wearing it because you want someone to think that you're more, you know, culturally aware? Or like, you know, why are you wearing this headpiece? Or do you think it's purely because it's fashionable? Are you being respectful? That's something that I think, I can't speak on behalf of every single culture, obviously, but it's important to speak to someone who has those experiences and has like a legitimate perception on the experiences of that culture.
I think a lot of it starts with stripping back, even from before the point of deciding I want to wear that, or where does that come from. But I think most of the problems start in the fact that a lot of people aren't educated about these topics to begin with. So when they decide to wear a Native American headdress or they decide to wear a kimono, like they're not even thinking about the cultural implications of, or what that means for the people that come from those cultures. So I really think that, in school we learn things that we don't use today. I mean,
algebra.
I don't use statistics. I mean, maybe, but not. Yeah, I give statistics when I'm doing top. I don't like, and I'm not using like calculus. I never actually even took calculus. Spoiler. But like, there are things I'm happy that I studied, but there are things that are not as applicable to my daily life and as important to navigate the world or to function among other human beings. And I think it really should start in the school systems where things need to be diverse and people need to have these conversations. So I mentioned that I was adopted. When I was young, my mum actually came into the school system and asked the teacher if she could do a little mini lesson. She's very A-type, but I'm happy she did it. It was great. Like, she did one to teach about Hanukkah, because we were raised Jewish, and then one to teach a little bit about Korean culture. And obviously, as a Jewish adoptee mom, it's not that she had direct access to that culture, but it was still the culture that her daughter came from, and still the culture that I definitely find legitimately my own. A different way than maybe a Korean that was raised by Korean parents do. But that's all to say that giving children that access to understanding new cultures, letting them, and that was a great way to appreciate, cooking latkes together and eating that together to celebrate Hanukkah in a community sense was a really positive thing. So I think the younger you can access children to understanding and seeing different as beautiful, but also different as equal, but also understanding that systemic racism does exist and that how you navigate the world as a white person will be different than somebody will navigate the world Hispanic, for example.
Completely, yeah.
Is really important. So it starts there, I really think.
No, definitely. I think that we're constantly learning. Like, even me, myself, as a woman of color, I'm constantly learning about, other cultures and also just, like, being confronted with issues as well that I had never really previously thought about. For example, like, I had a friend of mine, we were in a club and stuff, and she, like, whipped out her phone and presented me this, like, video clip, and she was, like, laughing, and I was, like, pretty excited to watch it. But then what appeared on the screen was, like, nothing that I had ever imagined she'd show me, and it was literally, so she's a white girl, and she was in a kimono.
In the video, so white girls in a kimono.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
In the video, she's in a kimono, and she has chopsticks in her hair, and she's, like, walking towards the camera and, like, kind of, doing very stereotypical poses, I guess you could say, in Japanese culture, and yeah, I was, like, immediately offended by it because I just feel like you have no appreciation for the culture. You haven't tried to learn anything about, like, the history of the kimono, yet you're, like, almost mocking it in front of me. And I think it's as simply as, like, asking herself, like, why am I doing this? Am I doing it for a laugh? Is it worth it? I think they're, like, really important questions to ask yourself.
They are, and I
engaging
think,
in.
Yeah, I think also stripping back again a little bit and really, there are a lot of people that don't even know, so I think it's not the job of somebody from the minority community to necessarily educate. Yet sometimes we do fall into those teaching roles. It's also really important, though, people from the white majority who do understand these topics to be an ally and to open the eyes of other people. I think the difficulty is for somebody who's never been confronted with the concept of systemic racism or of oppression, or they don't understand that white privilege does exist, it can be quite a jarring thing. Let's say if you are white and suddenly somebody's telling you that you benefit from a system that maybe you didn't really obviously put into place yourself, and maybe you're the type of person that has friends from all different places and you yourself never engage in racist activity, but to be upset about the fact that you passively benefit from something instead of recognizing the fact that you do and trying to actively fight against it, I think is doing a disservice to those from other communities that don't have a choice in the fact that they face oppression every day. And in my mind, it's a lot harder in the world to navigate things when you're constantly being pushed back versus being told, hey, you might benefit a little bit more. Like, I don't think that people need to get offended by that.
Definitely.
And they need to just understand that it exists, put white fragility to the side a bit, and just understand that, we all need to work together to make this world a place where, we can appreciate things on an equal level because no one's being oppressed,
Exactly.
We're not there yet, but
we
need to work
and we're not, and we're I mean, I'm still constantly learning, like I said, and when I did confront my friend, she was very apologetic, which I really appreciated, because it could have gone the other way around.
It's really hard. It's really hard to have those conversations. I would never tell a minority that they have to. I've been in situations too where like there are some friends where I can't have those conversations yet because I'm scared to.
Oh, completely, yeah.
It's also not my job, but at the same time, I want to get to that level with people where I can. I don't cancel them. I understand that they're just not as far along on their journey, and maybe other people would. Maybe other people would say I don't have time for that. I don't want to be one of those people because I want to always try to give people a chance to learn. But I think the biggest thing is also along, how can you deal with it? Well, if you want to do something simply because you find that it makes you look better, or that you find it aesthetically pleasing, that's not a good enough reason to marginalize someone else's culture, to take from them, and to deny ownership of something from somebody else simply because you think you look pretty.
Yeah.
I always say that, if you come from the white majority, there are a few words that you should never say. There are a few things that you should never wear, and then you're fine. Like, it's not that difficult, really, honestly, at the end of the day. So
I completely agree, yeah. So before we get into our next topic, I would like to play a song by the amazing Princess Nokia. She's an American rapper of Puerto Rican descent, and the song is called Mine.
great.
Is that a wig? I'm confused. Is that a weave? Is that your real hair? No, you can't touch my fucking hair. You ain't got no manners. Oh my god.
It's mine, I bought it. 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 I like the Dominicans who rock their weaves innocent. Shout out the Boricua girls who rock khaki ponytails. Big up to my Africans whose way many hours spent. They own their own businesses and work while they care for kids. You know I love auntie girls with Sunday best bonnet curls. And love to my Asian chicks who make hair go straight as shit. I love how West Indies do. It's gossip with hair and food. I love how West Indies do. With gossip is hair and food. Bundles, bundles, bundles. Hit that plug up for the bundles. Beauty shop supply, cashier ringing up the numbers. Rock my many scales, then go natural for the summer. Head blowing in the Hummer, flip the wheel, I am a stunner. Bundles, 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 hit that plug up for the bundles. Beauty shop supply, cashier ringing up the numbers. Rock my money scales, then go natural for the summer. Head blowing in the Hummer, flip the wheel, I am a stunner. Mine, I bought it, it's mine, I bought it, it's mine, I bought it, it's mine, I bought it. 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 Look how I stunt. Look how I stunt. Look how I stunt. Look how I stunt. In my lace front. 10 to the floor. 10 through your door. 10 to your face. 5 you a bore. Pick up the pace. Spit in your face. Dust in your creek. Joey the pace. Glue in my weave. Miss that's in me. Little band G, bruise on my knee, dip on a dip, making a trip. Wanna talk slick? I blow him a kiss. Glue in my weave, miss destiny. Little band G, bruise on my knee. Bundles, 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 hit that plug up for the bundles. Beauty shop supply, cashier ringing up the numbers. Rock my many scales, then go natural for the summer. Head blowing in the Hummer, flip the wheel, I am a stunner. Bundles, 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 hit that plug up for the bundles. Beauty shop supply, cashier ringing up the numbers. Rock my money styles, then go natural for the summer. Hair blowing in the Hummer, flip the wheel, I am a stunner.
Please do not ask me or any black or brown woman if our hair is real or not. If it's a wig, a weave, extensions, braids, don't fucking matter. It's very rude, it's extremely personal to be put on the spot like that. How we choose to wear our hair is our personal choice, okay? We bought it, it's ours. So have some manners and keep your curiosity to yourself.
Hello and welcome back. I just wanted to start off the next topic with a little story of mine, which I think a lot of people, including yourself, can relate to. When I was younger, like a teenager, I would obviously go to the store to like flick through fashion magazines, and I noticed that they were all like the beauty standards were quite narrow. They were all skinny, they were all white and tall, and I just didn't feel represented in these spaces. And it's obvious because there's like a lack of diversity, and this is like back in the 1990s or early 2000s. It's a hard thing to deal with, and it's come with a lot of internalized racism, something that I've really had to work through in terms of like my dating life, in terms of my friendships I circulate. And I have like memories of me being 17, 18 and approaching someone that I found attractive in a bar or a club or in like a very regular social setting. And instead of like engaging in small chit chat, I would ask them straight off the bat, like, are you interested in Asian women or Asian girls? And now that I look back as a 30-year-old woman, I'm kind of like, wow, like that's such a sad thing to have to ask. It's like the feeling of inadequacy purely based on your skin color, which is something that you're born with and you have no choice to change. It's
Interestingly, though,
yeah,
it's flipped itself, right? Because obviously I come from a very similar background.
Yeah.
And having mentioned coming from, a family where I'm adopted, everybody predominantly around me was white. So it wasn't simply just within school or within the media or looking on television and looking at people in positions of power, whether they were politicians or lawyers or whatever, also within my own home. So, I used to think that my parents loved my cousins more than me simply because they looked more like them, which is obviously not true. But when you're 6 or 7 and you don't have the words to express that, I mean, I don't know if anyone is like, I'm dating myself here a little bit, but like when I was young, there were these dolls called the American Girl dolls. And like, funnily enough, none of them were Asian. Like, they were all white dolls. There was one who was black who was supposed to be, who came from like the slave period. But they wasn't really an Asian doll. And I remember I had this one that was like from like the Victorian era, and her name was Samantha. And like I literally went to bed every day praying to God that I'd wake up looking like her because I did not like being in my own skin. So there was a lot of internalized racism. When I got older, a lot of my friends were Asian, and that was like the generation of like the Asian pride era where everybody had like souped up rice cars. Yeah.
Period,
and like
everyone had
wanted to be like an import tuner, like car model back then, and like every guy had like a souped up like Honda Civic or whatever. So there was a bit of pride
in the LA or American culture. I feel like in Australia it wasn't like that.
I mean, there was pride within the own community, but it was a very insular community, and it didn't venture outside of that. And so yes, of course, like when I got interested in Asian makeup and all these things, I turned to Korean media because I didn't have it in my own home. I didn't know how to put makeup on my eye shape. Who was I supposed to look for that? And then all these other type of beauty standards from Asia that have also been tempered by Western ideals of beauty came flooding in. So like I avoided the sun, like I didn't want to be tan. I thought I needed to get eye surgery. I thought I needed to do all these things to fit into this second standard of beauty that I was now being confronted with that was still impacted by Western beauty. But what's so interesting too, as you said, is that whereas when you were 17. And you went up to somebody in a club, like, looking for that validation of being found beautiful. Now I feel like because of the way that Asian women are seen by people as this overly sexualized object, it's the opposite, where we're trying to make sure they don't find Asian girls attractive specifically. Because I've dated people like that where you find out later on they're only with you because it's a complete fetishization. And then I'm like, no, I nope the fuck out there really quick because I don't want to be with somebody who's just with me because of the way I look.
No,
that's
definitely
not fair.
And like on top of what you just said as well, like the interesting thing is like now when I go to convenience stores or wherever you buy magazines these days, and I flick through the magazines, like
Who the hell buys magazines?
Where do you buy magazines these days?
I've literally, the last magazine I bought, I can't even tell you.
Well, when I'm at the post office.
It was the crime magazine, Stern's Crime.
Yeah, I think I was at the post office, and I kind of just like looked, like glazed over the magazines that were there, and it was interesting to see because they were POC models now. There's Slick Woods on the front of Marie Claire. There's like Joan S'mores on the front of like Vogue. So it's interesting to see that shift. But obviously, we need to be cautious of whether these brands are being authentic with their selection of models, because it could essentially be tokenism. And this is where we introduce the new topic that we're going to be discussing. And I want to start off, like I did before, by giving a definition of what it means. So tokenism is essentially the practice of making a symbolic effort to do a particular thing, especially by recruiting a smaller number of people from underrepresented groups in order to give the appearance of sexual and racial equality. Have you experienced that in your creative industry, or have you, like, what's the solution that we can ask ourselves as consumers? Like, are brands making a genuine effort in being diverse, or is it just like a front?
I
purely
think
because of
it's a
pressure?
really tricky one because you can only know by really speaking to the people higher up in the brand that are making those decisions. I know that also we're a little bit short on time, so this is a really big topic that we'd love to dive into hopefully in the future more in depthly. But I would say, there are two schools of thought. One could say that even if these companies are doing it in a very tokenist way, and they're just trying to tick the boxes to make sure that they kind of fulfill the guidelines or look like they're woke, or like whatever, that they're fitting into what modern society is meant to be like, to be inclusive simply for good PR. Obviously that's not great, but those women are still getting out there, they're still getting casted. And if it's so hard for women of colour to get casted to begin with, or people that are from the LGBT community, or maybe a woman who's handicapped, or a burn victim, or someone who's plus size, then any business or any work that they can get is a positive thing. At the same time, I do think that if these companies are doing it strictly because they feel like they want good PR for themselves, and these are the companies then people are investing their money into, and these companies then obviously are in bed with politicians, and you know how all of this kind of works within a capitalistic society anyway, then these people making larger decisions don't really have these people's best interests in mind. And so it's kind of like we're getting fooled a bit. I mean, you can look at Monroe Bergdorf, who was taken by L'Oreal, and the minute she kind of was a bit outspoken about what it meant to be black in America, they dropped her. And it just shows that they wanted somebody who made them look like they were kind of riding the wave of diversity in terms of like trans rights as well as women of color. And they completely decided to drop her the minute she opened her mouth to actually discuss these issues. And if you're not going to support people when they really need the support, or you can't stand behind them, then you can't profit off of them. I don't think it's fair. At the same time, I'm not going to deny anyone a job. And if you are that woman of color, or coming from any marginalized group, and you're getting offered that job, it's your decision to take, and it's your money that everyone got to get that back. So if you do that, that's fine, But I think we do need to be critical of it, and I think that leads me to my very last point that I'd wrap what I have to say up with, is that like support POC-led projects to begin with, support projects from the LGBT plus community first. There's enough of us out there. I mean, Lisa, you've got your black market clothing brand shop that people can support by buying directly from a woman of color. People can support Yoja by reading us, by coming to our events, eventually donating. But just there are programs that we're already doing within our communities. There are great musical collectives out here in Berlin, like No Shade. There's so many people doing great things, and we need to support them first and foremost. And if we can give ourselves that visibility, also from our own communities, we ourselves from these communities need to support each other.
I completely agree, and that's a huge reason why I started the black market as well.
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, obviously I love vintage clothing, and obviously I am a huge promoter of sustainable fashion, but a huge part of it is the fact that I just didn't see myself represented in this fashion world. And I am obviously a woman of color, and when I select my models, I select my friends who also happen to be women of color or men of color, and it's just
and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Very natural thing.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
I know that Peel got some slack, some heat for casting an all-black cast for that horror movie, but it's like every TV show out there is mostly for the white majority.
Exactly.
Like, let us have some space, let us take up space.
Exactly.
And we need to keep fighting for that space and support each other. And I think as long as we can give back to each other and also connect with people from all communities to make them understand that it's about unifying and supporting overall, then we can try to get into a better space.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the hour is up, so it's time for us to wrap it up. But I hope you guys have learned something interesting tonight. And I want to say thank you to Ray Tilly for being my very special guest.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and thank you for tuning into CCTV. I'm going to end this with a musician that needs no introduction, Rihanna. Bitch, better have my money.
Yeah, yo. Yeah, yo. Moon la la. Yeah, yo. Bitch better have my money. Y'all should know me well enough. Bitch better have my money. Please don't call me on my blood. Pay me what you want me. Ballin' bigger than LeBron. Bitch, give me your money. Who y'all think y'all frontin' on? Like blah, blah, blah. Louis 13 and it's all on me. Nigga, you just bought a shot. Kamikaze if you think that you gon'
like blah, blah, blah. Pay me what you want me. Don't act like you forgot.